May 31st, 2009, Rio de Janeiro's Galeão International Airport. The warm Brazilian winter evening is alive with the usual bustle of travelers. Inside the terminal, passengers queue at the Air France counter, checking in for Flight 447 to Paris. Among them are families returning from vacation, business travelers heading to Europe, and crew members preparing for what should be a routine overnight flight across the Atlantic. No one knows that within hours, all 228 people aboard will vanish into the darkness of the ocean. This is the story of Air France Flight 447, a tragedy that began with a perfect storm, was compounded by human error, and would take 2 years to solve. It's a story that changed aviation forever. The aircraft assigned to Flight 447 is an Airbus A330-203, registration FGZCP. It's a relatively young plane, delivered to Air France in 2005 with an excellent safety record. The wide-bodied jet is capable of carrying 293 passengers, though tonight it carries 216 passengers and 12 crew members. In command is Captain Marc Dubois, 58 years old, with nearly 11,000 flight hours and extensive experience on the A330. He's supported by 2 co-pilots, Pierre-Cédric Bonin, 32 years old with about 3,000 hours of flight time, and David Robert, the most experienced of the first officers with over 6,500 hours. The flight plan is straightforward, an 11-hour journey covering approximately 5,700 miles, taking them northeast across the Atlantic, following a route flown thousands of times before. But tonight, something is different. The weather. At 7:29 p.m. local time, Flight 447 pushes back from the gate. The passengers settle into their seats, some ordering wine, others preparing to sleep through the long night flight. Many are looking forward to arriving in Paris for the start of their European adventures or to reunite with loved ones. The Airbus taxis to runway 15 and at 7:29 p.m. receives clearance for takeoff. The engines spool up and the massive aircraft accelerates down the runway. At 7:33 p.m., Flight 447 lifts off into the darkening sky, climbing over Guanabara Bay and turning northeast toward the open Atlantic. For the first 3.5 hours, everything proceeds normally. The aircraft climbs to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Dinner service begins. The cabin lights are dimmed. Most passengers drift off to sleep. At around 11 p.m., about 3.5 hours into the flight, Captain Dubois takes his scheduled rest break. This is standard procedure on long-haul flights. He leaves the cockpit in the hands of his 2 first officers, Robert in the left seat and Bonin in the right. The 2 pilots are alone now, responsible for guiding 228 souls through the night. They can see the lightning ahead, flickering in the darkness like a distant light show. They begin making slight course corrections, trying to find a path through the storms. What they don't know is that a series of small failures is about to cascade into catastrophe. At 2:02 a.m. UTC, that's 11:02 p.m. Rio time, Flight 447 is approximately 565 miles northeast of the Brazilian coastal city of Natal. They're now over the mid-Atlantic, beyond the reach of radar coverage. From here, they communicate with air traffic control via periodic position reports. The aircraft is flying on autopilot, with the flight management system guiding them along their programmed route. Outside, the temperature has dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. The storms are all around them now. Towering columns of turbulent cloud stretching from the ocean's surface to 50,000 feet or higher. At 2:06 a.m., the aircraft enters the storm system. The turbulence begins, not severe, but enough to wake some passengers. The fastened seatbelt signs illuminate. In the cockpit, Bonan and Robert can see nothing but darkness and the occasional flash of lightning. They're flying on instruments, trusting the sophisticated systems of the Airbus A330 to keep them safe. Then at 2:10 a.m., something happens that will seal the fate of everyone aboard. The aircraft's pitot tubes, external sensors that measure airspeed by detecting the pressure of incoming air, begin to ice over. These pencil-thin probes are critical to the aircraft's flight computers. Without accurate airspeed data, the computers can't properly control the aircraft. Within seconds, the pilot's airspeed indicators show conflicting information. The autopilot, unable to determine the correct speed, disconnects automatically. The auto-thrust system disengages. The flight director, the guidance system that tells pilots how to fly the aircraft, disappears from the displays. Suddenly, the pilots are hand-flying an Airbus A330 in the middle of a thunderstorm at 35,000 feet in complete darkness with unreliable instruments. The cockpit erupts in warning chimes and alerts. Red and amber lights flash across the instrument panels. In the confusion, Bonan, who has taken control of the aircraft, makes a fateful decision. He pulls back on his side stick controller. In an Airbus, the side stick is a small joystick mounted on the side panel, unlike the traditional control yoke in other aircraft. Importantly, when one pilot moves their side stick, the other pilot's side stick doesn't move. There's no physical feedback. Unless you're looking at a small indicator or feeling the aircraft's response, you can't tell what the other pilot is doing.
Bonan pulls back and the nose of the aircraft pitches up. The Airbus begins to climb. The vertical speed indicator shows they're ascending at over 7,000 feet per minute, an extreme rate of climb. But in his confusion, or perhaps trying to maintain altitude as trained during turbulence encounters, Bonan continues to hold the stick back. Within 40 seconds, the aircraft climbs from 35,000 feet to nearly 38,000 feet. But at this altitude, in the thin air, the aircraft is already near its performance limits. The wings are at a high angle of attack, the angle between the wing and the oncoming air. And then it happens. The aircraft stalls. An aerodynamic stall occurs when a wing's angle of attack becomes too high and the smooth airflow over the wing breaks down, creating turbulence. When this happens, the wing loses lift. The aircraft stops flying and begins to fall. The stall warning sounds in the cockpit, a repeated stall, stall message, accompanied by a loud cricket chirping sound. But instead of pushing the nose down to recover from the stall, the fundamental response taught to every pilot, Bonan continues to pull back on the stick. The Airbus is now falling through the night sky, but its nose is still pitched up. It's descending at over 10,000 feet per minute while pointed upward, a paradoxical and deadly situation called a deep stall. Robert, in the left seat, hasn't fully grasped what's happening. The instrument readings are confusing. The altimeters are winding down rapidly, but the aircraft's nose is up. His brain struggles to reconcile the conflicting information. At 2:11:37, Robert finally understands something is terribly wrong. He calls out, "Climb! Climb! Climb! Climb!" But they're not climbing. They're falling. And they've already lost 3,000 feet. Bonan responds, "But I've been at maximum nose up for a while." It's a crucial moment. Bonan has just revealed that he's been pulling back on the stick, the exact opposite of what should be done. But in the chaos, Robert doesn't fully process this information. At 2:11:42, Captain Dubois returns to the cockpit. He's been resting for barely 10 minutes when he heard the commotion. He rushes back in, demanding to know what's happening. But it's too late for him to fully assess the situation. The aircraft has already lost 10,000 feet. The cockpit is filled with warnings and alarms. Both first officers are talking at once, trying to explain. The instruments are still showing unreliable readings. Dubois stands behind the two pilots, trying to make sense of the chaos. But the critical information that Bonin is holding the stick full back is never clearly communicated. The Airbus's side stick design means Dubois can't see what Bonin is doing. The stall warning continues. Then, in a tragic quirk of the aircraft's programming, as the airspeed drops below a certain threshold, the system decides the speed data is too unreliable to determine if they're in a stall. The stall warning stops. In the silence, the pilots might believe they've somehow recovered, but they haven't. They're still falling. At one point, Robert takes control and pushes his stick forward, the correct input to recover from the stall. Immediately, airspeed begins to increase, the nose drops. For a few precious seconds, the aircraft begins to recover. But Bonin still has his stick pulled back. In an Airbus, when both pilots give inputs, the computer averages them. So even as Robert pushes forward, Bonin's backward input negates it. The aircraft never fully recovers. And then, inexplicably, Robert lets go. Bonin's backward input dominates again. The aircraft pitches back up into the stall. They begin falling again, even faster now. The altimeter spins down through 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 2,000 feet. In the cabin, passengers are awakened by the violent movements and the angle of the aircraft. Some scream, others pray. Many clutch the hands of loved ones. They're dropping like a stone through the darkness, and there's nothing anyone can do. At 2:13, someone in the cockpit realizes they're about to hit the water. "We're going to crash. This can't be true," Robert shouts. Bonin, still pulling back on the stick, cries out, "But what's happening?"
At 2:14:28 a.m. UTC, Air France Flight 447 impacts the Atlantic Ocean at a descent rate of nearly 11,000 feet per minute while traveling at 107 knots. The aircraft is pitched nose up at 16 degrees, but falling almost vertically. The impact is catastrophic. The Airbus disintegrates on contact with the water. The force is equivalent to hitting concrete at over 100 miles per hour. No one survives. From the moment the pitot tubes iced over to the moment of impact, just 4 minutes and 23 seconds have elapsed. In that brief time, confusion, poor communication, and a failure to recognize a basic aerodynamic stall have turned a survivable malfunction into the deadliest crash in Air France's history. On the surface of the Atlantic, debris begins to float in the darkness. Seat cushions, luggage, pieces of the fuselage, and bodies. But there's no one to see. The nearest ship is hundreds of miles away. The aircraft has vanished in the most remote part of the ocean. When Flight 447 fails to make its scheduled position report at 2:20 a.m., air traffic controllers initially aren't concerned. Communication dropouts occasionally happen over the Atlantic. But as the minutes tick by without contact, worry begins to set in. At 2:29 a.m., controllers try to reach the flight. No response. At 3 a.m., they contact Air France operations. Has anyone heard from Flight 447? No one has. By dawn on June 1st, the grim reality is settling in. Flight 447 is missing somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. The last known position was transmitted automatically by the aircraft's ACARS system, a data link that sends maintenance and position information to the airline. It places the aircraft about 565 miles northeast of the Brazilian coast, but the ocean in that area is vast, deep, and treacherous. The search zone covers tens of thousands of square miles, and the depth of the water in that region averages 10,000 to 13,000 feet, nearly 3 miles down. Brazil, France, and the United States immediately launch a massive search and rescue operation, though everyone knows that rescue is unlikely. Ships and aircraft converge on the search area from multiple countries. The Brazilian Air Force deploys reconnaissance aircraft. The French government sends naval vessels, The U.S. provides satellite imagery and expertise. On June 6th, 5 days after the crash, the first debris is found floating on the surface. Seat cushions, a vertical stabilizer, part of the fuselage with the Air France logo still visible, and bodies. Over the next few weeks, 50 bodies are recovered from the ocean, still strapped in their seats or wearing their life vests. But the main wreckage, the fuselage, the engines, the wings, and most critically, the flight recorders, are nowhere to be found. Without the black boxes, investigators have only fragmentary data to work with. The automated ACARS messages sent by the aircraft in its final minutes provide some clues. Problems with the airspeed indicators, disconnection of the autopilot, multiple system warnings. But these messages don't tell the whole story. They don't reveal what the pilots were doing or what they were saying. The French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, known as the BEA, takes the lead in the investigation. They face an unprecedented challenge. Modern aircraft are designed to be found after crashes. They carry emergency locator transmitters, and most importantly, their flight recorders, the black boxes, emit ultrasonic pings that can be detected by special equipment. But the pingers on the flight recorders only work for about 30 days. After that, the batteries die and the boxes go silent. The BEA has just a month to find them in an area the size of Austria, under 3 miles of water. Specialized search vessels arrive, equipped with deep-sea sonar and submersibles. French nuclear submarines join the search. For weeks, they scan the ocean floor, listening for the faint ping of the flight recorders. On June 30th, the pings go silent. The batteries are dead. The search continues through July, but without the acoustic signal, finding the recorders becomes exponentially harder. By August, with no significant new discoveries, the search is suspended. The families of the 228 victims are left without answers. The aviation community is left without the data needed to prevent future tragedies.
Then, in 2011, nearly 2 years after the crash, a private American company called Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution joins the search. They bring cutting-edge technology and a fresh perspective on where to look. On April 3, 2011, their sonar picks up something: a large debris field on the ocean floor, 12,800 feet below the surface. They deploy an underwater robot equipped with cameras. And there, in the grainy video feed, they see it. Pieces of an aircraft engine, landing gear, sections of fuselage. It's Flight 447. Over the next several weeks, the debris field is systematically mapped. On May 1st, investigators make the crucial discovery. Both flight recorders are found, battered but intact, lying in the wreckage. When the recorders are brought to the surface and their data is extracted, the true story of Flight 447's final moments finally emerges. And what the investigators hear on the cockpit voice recorder shocks even the most experienced aviation experts. The recorders reveal that the crash was not caused by the weather or the icing of the pitot tubes or any mechanical failure of the aircraft. Those were just the triggering events. The crash was caused by something far more troubling: a fundamental breakdown in cockpit coordination and a basic piloting error. Bonin had held the stick back, keeping the aircraft in a stall for nearly the entire 4-minute descent. Robert and Captain Dubois never fully understood what was happening. The Airbus's side stick design, which doesn't provide tactile feedback between the pilots, contributed to the confusion. And the stall warning, which paradoxically stopped during the deepest part of the stall, gave false reassurance. But most troubling was this: the recovery from a stall is one of the most basic skills taught to pilots. Push the stick forward,
lower the nose, regain airspeed. It's practiced countless times during training. Yet in the stress and confusion of that night, with unreliable instruments and disorienting motion, Bonin did the opposite, and no one stopped him. The final report from the BEA is released in July 2012, 3 years after the crash. It's a devastating document that assigns blame to multiple parties. The pilots are criticized for poor crew coordination, failure to recognize and recover from the stall, and loss of situational awareness. But the report also faults Air France for inadequate training in manual flying skills and stall recovery, particularly at high altitudes. And Airbus is criticized for the design of the A330's flight control system, particularly the side stick configuration and the stall warning logic. The report makes 25 safety recommendations. Some are implemented immediately. Airlines around the world revise their training programs to emphasize manual flying skills and high-altitude stall recovery. Pilots are taught to better recognize and respond to unreliable airspeed situations. Airbus modifies the stall warning system so it won't turn off during a deep stall. They also improve the side stick system to provide better feedback when both pilots are making inputs. Aviation regulators mandate the replacement of the older model pitot tubes, which were more prone to icing, with newer, more reliable versions. But no amount of investigation or safety improvements can bring back the 228 people who died that night. They came from 33 different countries. They were children and grandparents, business people and honeymooners, pilots and flight attendants. Each one had a story, a family, a future that ended in the dark Atlantic waters. The youngest victim was just 7 years old, traveling with his family. The oldest was 79, returning from vacation. Among the dead was Prince Pedro Luis Orleans Bragança, a member of Brazil's imperial family. There were musicians, engineers, doctors, students, all gone in an instant. For the families, the 2-year wait for answers was agonizing. Many traveled to France, demanding information, holding vigils, pressuring investigators to keep searching. When the truth finally emerged, that the crash was preventable, that basic piloting errors had killed their loved ones, the grief was compounded by rage and frustration.
Legal proceedings dragged on for years. Families sued Air France and Airbus. Some received settlements, others fought on. In 2021, 12 years after the crash, a French court ruled that Air France should be tried for manslaughter. But in 2024, both Air France and Airbus were acquitted of criminal charges, though the civil cases continue. The crash site remains on the ocean floor, a scattered grave nearly 3 miles beneath the surface. Most of the wreckage was left in place, too deep and too fragile to recover. The ocean has claimed it, along with 178 of the 228 victims, whose bodies were never found. Air France Flight 447 stands as one of the most intensely studied accidents in aviation history. It revealed troubling truths about modern aviation, that pilots, accustomed to flying with sophisticated automation, can lose basic flying skills, that in moments of extreme stress and confusion, even well-trained professionals can make fatal errors, and that technology, for all its sophistication, cannot fully protect us from human fallibility. But the crash also demonstrated something else: the relentless commitment of investigators, searchers, and families who refused to let 228 people simply disappear into the ocean. Their determination to find the truth, to learn from the tragedy, and to make aviation safer has potentially saved countless lives since. Today, when you board an airliner,
You're statistically safer than you've ever been in the history of flight. Every crash, every accident, every near miss contributes to a vast database of knowledge that makes flying incrementally safer. The tragedy of Flight 447 is part of that painful but necessary learning process. The families of the victims have created memorials on 3 continents. At Rio's Santos Dumont Airport, a simple plaque honors those who departed from Brazil. At Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport, where the flight was meant to arrive, there's a memorial in the chapel. And at Cimetière de Montparnasse in Paris, a monument lists all 228 names. But perhaps the most fitting memorial is invisible. The changes made to training programs, aircraft systems, and safety protocols around the world. Every pilot who now practices high-altitude stall recovery, every improved pitot tube, every refined procedure for handling emergencies carries forward the legacy of those who died. On a clear night, if you look up at the sky, you might see the lights of an airliner passing overhead, carrying hundreds of people safely across the ocean. It's a routine sight, one we barely notice anymore. But every one of those safe flights is built on the lessons learned from flights like AF 447, lessons purchased at a terrible price. Flight 447 vanished into the Atlantic on June 1, 2009, but it was found. The truth was uncovered, and from that truth came change. In the end, that's all we can do. Remember, learn, and commit to doing better. For the 228 souls who boarded that flight in Rio, expecting to see Paris by morning, it's the very least we owe them.